A peaceful morning at Black Rock Marina. The kind of morning where time moves a little slower, where the smell of salt lingers in the crisp air, and the only sounds are the gentle lapping of waves against the wooden docks. Seagulls called out overhead, circling lazily as Emma Carter secured the ropes on her father's boat. It was routine, the same thing she had done every morning since she was old enough to help. Checking the lines, making sure the bait was stocked, coiling the ropes just right. Her father had taught her that. A perfect coil meant a smooth cast, and a smooth cast meant a good catch. The water was calm, stretching out toward the horizon in an endless ripple of blue. For a brief moment, she let herself breathe it in, let herself enjoy the stillness before the workday began. And then she heard it, the low, distant rumble. At first, it was just a vibration in the air, like a summer storm rolling in over the hills. But storms didn't come from the road. Engines, her hands stilled on the rope. The sound grew louder, closer, the deep growl of motorcycles tearing through the morning silence. Emma turned, her stomach tightening as a line of bikes appeared at the top of the hill leading down into the marina. A dozen, maybe more, chrome gleaming under the morning sun, black leather jackets and heavy boots. They moved as one, a pack rolling into town with the confidence of men who feared nothing and no one. She knew, even before they reached the gravel lot, that this wasn't just a group of tourists passing through. They didn't ride like tourists. They rode like men who owned the road. The first bike peeled off into the lot, kicking up a small cloud of dust as it skidded to a stop. The others followed, engines shutting off one by one, leaving behind an eerie silence that was somehow more threatening than the noise. Emma swallowed hard. The lead rider swung his leg off his bike, standing tall as he pulled off his helmet. He was massive, easily over 6 feet, broad shoulders straining against his leather vest. His face was lined, rough, a jagged scar running down one side of his cheek like a reminder of the kind of life he had lived. The name stitched onto his vest read COBRA. The others followed suit, removing their helmets, cracking their knuckles, rolling their shoulders like they were gearing up for something. Their jackets bore the same insignia, a coiled snake wrapped around a skull. The Reapers. She had heard the name before, whispered in town. A gang that ran along the coast, moving from town to town like a storm that left nothing but wreckage in its wake. They weren't just known for causing trouble. They were known for staying once they decided a place was worth taking. And now they were here. Emma took a slow step back, her pulse hammering against her ribs. She needed to get to the marina office. Glenn was inside. He was old, but he had a phone. She turned to move, but Cobra's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Well, what do we have here?" The words sent a chill up her spine. The other bikers chuckled, low and cruel, as they spread out, their boots crunching against the gravel. Emma forced herself to stand tall. "This is private property." Cobra tilted his head, considering her like a wolf sizing up its prey. "That's so?" She nodded. "If you're not here for a charter, I'll have to ask you to leave." One of the men, lean with a wiry build and tattoos snaking up his arms, laughed. "Or what? You gonna call the cops?" The others joined in, the laughter filled with amusement, not concern, because men like them didn't worry about the law. Emma's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she kept her voice even. "Just leave." Cobra took a step closer, then another. She held her ground. "I don't think you understand," he said, voice slow and deliberate. "We go where we want, and right now, we like it here." The meaning in his words was clear. Emma's heart pounded. She needed to buy time. Her father would be back soon. If she could just keep them talking, keep them from doing whatever it was they had come here to do, then maybe this wouldn't end the way she feared. But then one of them reached out, brushing a finger along the edge of her sleeve. And she knew. Talking wasn't going to be enough. Emma felt her breath hitch as Cobra's rough finger traced the fabric of her sleeve. It was barely a touch, just the edge of his fingertip grazing her arm, but the meaning behind it sent a cold shiver through her bones. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't harmless. It was a warning, a test. The rest of the gang watched closely, their smirks widening, their body language shifting. They were reading her, waiting to see how she would react. Would she pull away? Would she freeze? Would she cower? She did none of those things. Emma squared her shoulders and met Cobra's gaze, her expression hard as steel. "Don't touch me." Cobra's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile, feisty. The biker beside him, tall, wiry, his arms covered in inked snakes and wolves, chuckled. "I like that. Makes things more fun." Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. Stay calm. Stay in control. She took a careful step back, measuring the distance between herself and the marina office. Glenn was inside. If she could just get there, just get to the phone. But Cobra was already moving, shifting to block her path. Now, he drawled. "Where you off to in such a hurry?" The rest of them fanned out slightly, a loose, shifting circle around her, not quite trapping her in, but close enough to make her feel the weight of their presence, close enough that escape wouldn't be easy. "Maybe she's going to get help," the wiry one mused, his grin widening. "Maybe she's got someone big and scary waiting in that little office." Cobra chuckled. "Or maybe she just doesn't know the rules." Emma forced herself to breathe, to stay steady. "I know the rules, and I know that you're trespassing." Cobra tilted his head. "Trespassing?" He turned slightly, glancing over at the marina, the quiet boats bobbing on the water, the empty docks, the peaceful stillness that surrounded them. "Looks to me like we're just enjoying the view." A few of the others chuckled. Emma clenched her jaw. "Then enjoy it somewhere else." Cobra stepped closer. Too close. She could see the faint scar above his brow, the rough stubble along his jaw. She could smell the leather and cigarettes and gasoline clinging to his clothes, and she could feel the tension rolling off him like a slow-building storm. "You've got guts," he admitted. "I respect that." Emma's fingers curled into fists. She didn't need his respect. She needed them gone. Cobra looked past her, toward the boats. "Nice little business you got here. Your old man owns it, right?" Emma didn't answer. The wiry one grinned. "Yeah, I heard about him. John Carter. Used to be some kind of military badass, right?" He cracked his knuckles. "Funny how guys like that always end up running fishing charters. Bet he thinks he's got this place all locked down. Safe." Emma's stomach twisted. They knew who her father was. That wasn't good. Cobra's smile didn't waver. "Thing is, sweetheart, safe is an illusion." Emma's heartbeat thundered in her chest. She needed to move. She needed to do something. Cobra turned, pacing slowly toward the edge of the dock. "See, me and my boys, we're always looking for new opportunities. And this little marina?" He glanced around. "Looks like it could use some protection." The way he said the word made Emma's blood go cold. "Protection," the wiry one echoed. "That's a good idea, boss. You know, in case something were to happen." Emma forced herself to stay calm. "Nothing's going to happen." Cobra turned back to her, his gaze sharp. "That depends, doesn't it?" The way he looked at her sent every instinct she had screaming. He was enjoying this, enjoying the way she was holding her ground, the way she was trying to keep control of the situation. He wasn't just here to intimidate her. He was here to test her, to see how much she'd break before he decided to push further. "See," Cobra continued, rubbing his jaw. "A place like this? It's got value. Good location. Secluded. No nosy neighbors." Emma swallowed hard. "We could do a lot with this place," he mused. "But the real question is, does your daddy know how to share?" Emma's jaw tightened. "My father doesn't deal with people like you." Cobra's eyes gleamed. "That's a shame." Behind him, the other bikers were murmuring, shifting, moving just enough to make her uneasy. Then Cobra took another step toward her, a slow, deliberate step. "I think," he murmured, "that maybe you and I should have a little talk about business." Emma's breath came faster. Not good at all. She took another step back, but her heel hit the edge of the dock. No more room. Cobra smirked, trapped. Her fingers twitched, instinctively reaching for anything she could use. And then, just as Cobra was about to speak again, a loud, shrill ringing cut through the tension. The marina office phone. The bikers all turned slightly, their attention flicking toward the small building. Glenn. Emma didn't hesitate. She moved. Fast. She ducked, twisting away from Cobra's reach, her body moving before she could even think. By the time he realized what was happening, she was already sprinting across the dock. She heard shouts behind her, Cobra cursing, the wiry one laughing, someone moving to block her path. But she didn't stop. She ran, straight toward the office, straight toward Glenn, straight toward the only chance she had, because her father was coming, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. John Carter had spent years reading the currents. He could tell when a storm was coming just by the way the wind shifted, the way the air felt heavier, denser. He'd seen bad weather roll in from miles away, giving him just enough time to prepare before the skies tore open. But this wasn't the kind of storm he could see on the horizon. This was the kind that came fast, the kind that hit before you even knew it was there. He gripped the wheel of his boat, his mind already shifting into high alert as Glenn's voice echoed through the phone. "Bikers! They've got Emma cornered!" His stomach dropped. John didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. "Folks, we're cutting the trip short," he said, turning to his passengers, a small family of 4 who had booked a morning fishing charter. The father, a wiry man with glasses, frowned. "Is everything all right?" "Family emergency," John said. "We'll get you a full refund." There was no time to explain. He cut the engine speed to full throttle, sending the boat slicing through the water at an angle that rocked the deck beneath their feet. Something in his tone must have told them not to argue. The family clutched onto the railing, wide-eyed, as the boat surged toward shore. John's mind was already calculating. He had maybe 3 minutes before he reached the dock. 3 minutes to prepare for whatever was waiting for him. He didn't know how many there were. He didn't know if they were armed. What he did know was that if they had laid a hand on Emma, it wouldn't matter how many of them there were. They wouldn't walk away unscathed. The wind cut against his face as the marina came into view. His eyes locked onto the dock, and there she was, Emma, running. His pulse spiked. Behind her, a group of men, big, leather-clad, moving fast. John's grip tightened on the wheel. He was already shifting into combat mode, already analyzing, already preparing. His instincts, honed from years in the field, kicked in with the ruthless efficiency that had once kept him alive in the most hostile environments on Earth. He noted their positioning, the way they moved, the way they spread out like they were used to surrounding people. This wasn't just a group of rowdy bikers. They were trained in intimidation. But intimidation only worked on people who hadn't spent their lives fighting worse things. John cut the engine just as the boat reached the dock. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. Emma reached the edge, breathless. John stepped forward. "What's going on?" he asked, voice low and steady. Emma's hands were trembling, but her eyes were fierce. "They're trying to take the marina." She didn't have to say anything else. John's gaze lifted. The bikers had stopped their approach. They were watching him now, measuring him. The leader, big, scarred, and radiating arrogance, took a step forward, the others shifting with him. John had seen men like this before, men who relied on fear, men who had never faced something or someone they couldn't intimidate. He took his time tying off the boat, every motion precise, controlled. Then, slowly, he straightened. Cobra smirked. "You Carter?" John met his gaze. "I am." Cobra's smirk widened. "Good. Makes things easier." John didn't move, didn't speak. He just waited. Cobra gestured toward the marina. "Nice little business you got here. We were just having a chat with your daughter about expanding operations." John's expression didn't change. "That right?" "Yeah." Cobra spread his arms, his tone light. "See, me and my boys? We like to invest in places like this, offer some protection." Emma took a step closer to her father, but John kept his focus locked on Cobra. "Not interested," he said. Cobra chuckled. That's the thing about business, old man. It's not always about what you're interested in. It's about what you can afford. John tilted his head slightly. Oh? Cobra's smirk faltered just a fraction. Yeah. He nodded toward the other bikers. See, accidents happen. Boats go missing. Property gets damaged. It's a shame when people don't... John moved, fast. 1 second, Cobra was standing there, smug and confident. The next, John was in front of him, close enough that Cobra barely had time to react before he felt it. The pressure of John's hand wrapping around his wrist, not squeezing, not twisting, just holding. A warning. Cobra's breath hitched. John's grip was solid, unshakable. You ever hear of SEAL Team 6? John asked, his voice quiet. Cobra blinked. The others stiffened. John leaned in slightly, not enough to be aggressive, just enough to make sure every word landed. I spent 15 years with them. His voice was calm, steady. And I suggest you walk away. A silence fell over the dock. One of the younger bikers shifted, uncomfortable. Another took a half-step back. They had come here thinking they were dealing with an aging fisherman. Now they were realizing their mistake. Cobra yanked his wrist free, covering the movement with a scoff. So what? He rolled his shoulders, trying to shake off the tension. You think you're some kind of action hero? John didn't answer. He didn't need to, because Cobra saw it now. In John's stance, in his eyes. He saw the kind of man who didn't bluff. The kind of man who had already calculated exactly how this would go if they pushed him. Cobra exhaled sharply, forcing a grin. Relax, Carter. No need to get all worked up. John didn't move, didn't blink. Cobra turned to his men, motioning toward the bikes. Come on, boys. We'll give the old man some time to reconsider. The others hesitated for just a second, like they didn't quite believe they were retreating, but one by one they backed away. John watched them go. He didn't relax. Not yet. Not until they were gone. Not until the roar of their engines had faded into the distance. Only then did he look at Emma. You okay? She nodded, but her hands were still shaking. John placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. They'll be back. Emma swallowed hard. Then what do we do? John's expression was unreadable. Then, he said, his voice calm and sure, we show them why that's a mistake. The marina was quiet again. Too quiet. Emma stood beside her father on the dock, her pulse still racing, her hands still trembling from the confrontation that had just unfolded. The bikers were gone, for now, but she could feel the tension lingering in the air, thick and heavy. They'll be back, John had said. She didn't doubt him for a second. The Reapers weren't the kind of men who walked away from a challenge. They thrived on dominance, on control. If they let this go, their reputation would crack, and men like them didn't survive long once they lost the fear they commanded, which meant this wasn't over, not even close. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her father's grip on her shoulder was the only thing keeping her grounded. You okay? He asked again, his voice steady. She nodded. Yeah. A pause. I mean, no, not really. John didn't say anything right away, just watched her. She knew that look. It was the same one he'd always given her when she was a kid, when she was scared or upset about something but too stubborn to admit it. It was a look that said, I see you, I hear you, and I've got you. She swallowed. They knew who you were, Dad. John's jaw tightened. I figured, he said. Emma shook her head. They weren't just here to scare me. They were here to send a message. John exhaled slowly, looking out over the water, his expression unreadable. Yeah, he murmured. I know. The sound of a door opening behind them made them both turn. Glenn, the old marina manager, shuffled out of the office, his face drawn with concern. I called the sheriff, he said, voice gruff. Told him what happened. John nodded. What did he say? Glenn scoffed. What do you think? Said he'd look into it. That's about all we're getting from him. Emma sighed. It wasn't a surprise. Sheriff Collins was the kind of lawman who liked to keep things simple. And if that meant looking the other way when real trouble came knocking, then that's exactly what he did. John ran a hand over his jaw, deep in thought. They'll wait until dark, he said finally. Glenn frowned. "What makes you so sure?" John looked at him. "Because if they were going to hit us broad daylight, they would have done it already." Emma felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "They'll come back," she murmured, "when no one's around, when no one can stop them." John nodded. Glenn cursed under his breath. "Damn snakes, what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and wait for 'em?" John didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the water, his mind clearly working through the problem the way he always did, analyzing, strategizing, preparing. "No," he said after a long pause. "We're not waiting." Emma felt a flicker of something deep in her chest. Hope. "You've got a plan," she said. John glanced at her, then back at Glenn. "How many people are still around the marina?" Glenn scratched his chin. "A handful. A couple of the charter guys, some of the dock hands. Not much." John nodded. "Call them in." Glenn's brows pulled together. "What for?" "Because when those bastards come back, I want them to know they picked the wrong fight." Emma watched as her father turned, striding toward the marina office with purpose, pulling out his phone. This was happening. This was real. Glenn grunted. "You really think you can stop 'em, Carter?" John paused just for a second. Then he turned back, his eyes cold and sure. "I know I can." The next hour was a blur of movement. John made calls. Not to the sheriff, not to the town's useless authorities, but to people he trusted. Emma didn't know exactly who was on the other end of those calls, but the way her father spoke, the way his voice took on that clipped, no-nonsense tone, she knew they weren't just friends. They were people who knew things, people who had seen combat, had lived it, and they were coming. Glenn gathered the few dockhands and fishermen who were still around, briefing them on what had happened. Some of them looked nervous, others looked angry, but none of them walked away. "Damn bikers," one of the older fishermen grunted, shaking his head. "Think they can roll in and take over?" "Not happening." Emma felt something shift in the air, a kind of quiet resolve. Her father wasn't just preparing for a fight. He was building something stronger, a defense, a warning. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, John pulled her aside. "I need you to do something for me," he said. Emma tensed. "If you're about to tell me to leave—" "I'm not." That surprised her. He met her gaze, his eyes steady. "You know this marina better than anyone. You know where the blind spots are, where the best vantage points are. I need you to be my eyes." Emma swallowed. "You want me to—" "I want you to watch," John said. "From the office, from the security feed. If you see anything, you call it in. Understood?" She hesitated, not because she didn't want to help, but because she wanted to be out there, with him. But John had never asked her for anything she couldn't handle, and he was trusting her with this. She nodded. "Yeah, I got it." John exhaled, squeezing her shoulder. "Good." Emma turned and headed toward the office, nerves twisting inside her. She didn't know what was going to happen tonight, but she knew one thing for sure. The Reapers thought they were coming back to finish what they started. They thought they had the upper hand. They had no idea that they were walking into a fight they couldn't win. Because they weren't just dealing with a fisherman, they were dealing with a Navy SEAL. And some mistakes you only make once. The last of the daylight faded, and with it, the marina took on an eerie stillness. The water, once shimmering with golden reflections, had turned black and glassy, stretching out into the night like an abyss. The air smelled of salt and motor oil, thick with the quiet hum of a place bracing for a storm. Emma sat inside the marina office, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk as she stared at the security monitors. The old system Glenn had installed years ago was outdated, the grainy screens flickering with static every so often, but they did the job. They showed the empty docks, the parking lot, the entrance road leading down from the main highway. Nothing yet. She exhaled slowly, willing her pulse to settle. She had a job to do. Outside, her father moved with a quiet confidence, checking the positions of the people who had stayed behind. Most of them weren't fighters. They were fishermen, dockhands, charter captains, but they knew this marina, knew every rope and bolt and shadowed corner, and right now, that mattered more than muscle. John moved along the dock, speaking in low tones to the men stationed near the boats. They had improvised defenses, floodlights set to blind anyone who approached, ropes laid out strategically to slow them down, even a few well-placed obstacles made from heavy fishing crates. It wasn't much, but John wasn't planning for an all-out battle. He was planning to control the field, make them come to him. Emma tore her gaze away from the monitors long enough to glance at her phone. No messages. Her father had made calls earlier, calls to men she didn't know. Whoever they were, they weren't here yet. She swallowed hard. Would they even make it in time? A sharp crackle from the radio next to her made her jump. Glenn's voice came through, rough but steady. "Anything?" Emma pressed the button. "Nothing yet. Keep watching." She didn't need to be told. The minutes stretched. The marina remained silent, and then headlights, far off but growing closer. Her breath caught in her throat as she leaned toward the screen. Multiple bikes, at least 6, maybe more, moving in tight formation down the highway, not fast, not reckless, deliberate. They weren't just returning. They were making a statement. She grabbed the radio. "They're coming." Outside, John's head lifted slightly as the message came through. His expression didn't change, but Emma saw it, that shift in his stance, the readiness, the tension that came just before action. The motorcycles slowed as they approached the entrance to the marina. Their headlights cut through the darkness, casting long, shifting shadows. Then they stopped, engines idling. The air vibrated with the low, steady growl of the machines. Emma's fingers tightened around the radio. This was different from earlier. Before, they had been cocky, overconfident. Now they were assessing, testing. She could see them on the monitor, could see Cobra sitting at the head of the pack, his hands resting casually on the handlebars, like a king surveying his kingdom. A slow moment passed, then the engines cut off, one by one. Silence, a deeper silence than before. Emma's breath came shallow. The bikers dismounted, not rushing, taking their time. Cobra adjusted his leather vest, rolling his shoulders as he stepped forward. And then, finally, he spoke. "Carter." One word, a challenge. John took a step forward. "You lost?" Cobra's lips curled. "Don't think so." He glanced around, his gaze sweeping over the marina, over the men standing near the boats, over the shadows, over everything. He wasn't just looking, he was calculating. John didn't move, didn't speak. He let Cobra do what he needed to do. And then Cobra laughed. It was slow, deliberate, filled with amusement. "Gotta say, I wasn't expecting a welcome committee." John's face remained unreadable. "Didn't think you'd need one." Cobra smirked. "Oh, I don't, but I do appreciate the effort." The bikers behind him chuckled. A slow, steady ripple of sound. Emma's grip tightened on the radio. This wasn't good. Cobra wasn't backing down. He was enjoying this. "You made a mistake earlier, Carter," he continued, "and I get it. You're protecting your little business, your little family. It's cute." John's eyes darkened slightly, but he didn't take the bait. Cobra tilted his head. "Problem is, you embarrassed us, and in our world that's not something we just let slide." John let the silence stretch. Then he spoke, calm, even. "You should have left it alone." Cobra's smirk widened. "Maybe, but then again..." He glanced over his shoulder at the bikers behind him. "I brought some friends." The men behind him stepped forward. Emma counted them. 9, no, 10. They had more than doubled their numbers. Her stomach knotted. John exhaled slowly. "That's a lot of people for one marina." Cobra grinned. "Like I said, we don't like being embarrassed." Silence. Heavy. Tense. John shifted slightly, his weight even, his posture relaxed. But Emma saw it. The way his right hand hovered just slightly near his side, not clenched, not threatening, but ready. Cobra took another step forward. "So, I'm going to give you one last chance, Carter." His voice was soft now, almost friendly. "Hand over the marina, give us a cut of your business, and we walk away. Simple as that." John didn't answer right away. Then he said, "No." The word hung in the air. Final. Certain. Cobra's face hardened. Shame. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one of the bikers moved, fast, reaching for something under his vest. Emma's heart shot into her throat. John moved faster. In one smooth motion, he stepped in, twisting the man's wrist, sending the weapon, a knife, clattering to the dock. A sharp cry of pain. The man dropped to his knees. The other bikers tensed, but no one moved. Not yet. John straightened, his expression cold. Walk. Away. His voice was soft, controlled, deadly. Cobra's jaw tightened. He was out of options. He knew it. Emma knew it. Everyone knew it. The bikers hesitated, uncertain. Cobra's fingers twitched. Then he let out a slow breath, stepped back, and smiled. "All right, Carter." A pause. "You win tonight." He turned, motioned for his men. One by one they backed away, got on their bikes, started their engines. Cobra met John's gaze one last time, and then he left. The roar of their engines faded into the night. Emma let out a shaky breath. John didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded. Her voice was steady. "They'll be back." John's lips pressed into a thin line. "I know." And when they did, they'd be ready. The silence that followed the roar of the motorcycles was almost louder than the engines themselves, the kind of silence that pressed down, heavy and thick, stretching between the docks and the dark waters beyond. Emma could still feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, making her hands tremble despite her efforts to stay steady. John Carter stood in the center of the dock, his stance relaxed. But Emma knew better. His shoulders were tight, his muscles coiled, and though his face remained unreadable, she recognized the way his jaw clenched ever so slightly. He wasn't fooled. Neither was she. Cobra had backed down, for now. But Emma had seen the way his eyes had flickered with something just before he left. That wasn't surrender. That was planning. That was waiting. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. "They're going to come back." John didn't answer right away. Instead, he scanned the dark road leading up from the marina as if waiting for the motorcycles to reappear, as if expecting them to. Then finally he spoke. "Yeah," he said, "they will." Glenn let out a frustrated breath from behind them. "So what the hell do we do now?" "We got lucky tonight, but next time?" He shook his head. "Next time, they'll be ready for a fight." John turned to face him, his expression calm. "Then we get ready too." Emma frowned. "Dad, this isn't some bar fight. These guys—" She hesitated, the memory of Cobra's smug smirk flashing through her mind. "They don't let things go. You embarrassed them. That means they're going to hit harder next time." John nodded. "I know." Emma exhaled sharply. "Then we need to call the sheriff." "No," John interrupted, his voice even. "Sheriff Collins won't do a damn thing. Even if he wanted to, his department's too small to handle a gang like the Reapers." Glenn grunted. "Damn right about that. Collins doesn't stick his neck out for anyone unless he's got no other choice." Emma frowned. "So then what? We just sit here and hope for the best?" John gave her a look. "You know me better than that." A flicker of relief passed through her. Because, yeah, she did know him better than that. Her father didn't hope. He prepared. John turned back to Glenn. "Get word out to the dock workers. Anyone who's got ties here. Let them know what's coming. Anyone who doesn't want to be around for this needs to clear out before tomorrow night." Glenn hesitated, then nodded. "Got it." John turned to Emma. "You still got that old burner phone I gave you?" Emma blinked. "Yeah, why?" John reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper, handing it to her. "There's a number on there. Send a message. Just 3 words. I need you." Emma's stomach tightened. She looked down at the number, then back up at him. "Who is this?" John held her gaze for a moment before answering. "An old friend." That was all he said, but the weight in his tone told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just some drinking buddy from his past. This was one of them, a man like him, a man trained for war. Emma hesitated only a second before nodding. She pulled out the burner phone, typing the message exactly as he'd said it. "I need you." The message sent. Now all they could do was wait. The next morning, the marina was still standing. It almost felt wrong, like the world should have changed after last night. But instead, everything looked the same. The boats rocked gently in the water, the smell of salt filled the air, and the seagulls called out as they drifted above the docks. But the tension was there, beneath the surface. Everyone felt it. The few workers who had stayed moved differently, quieter, warier, their gazes flickering toward the entrance of the marina like they expected the reapers to come roaring back at any second. Emma stood by the marina office, watching as her father worked. He wasn't just going through the usual motions. He was reinforcing, checking the locks, double-knotting the dock lines, running his hands along the railings, making sure everything was secure. She knew what he was doing. She had seen him do it before, back when she was younger, when she was still too small to fully understand what he was. There had been nights when she had woken up to find him pacing the living room, checking the windows, the doors, the locks. At the time she had thought it was just an old habit, something left over from his military days. Now she knew better. He was anticipating, always watching, always preparing, because men like him, they never stopped being soldiers. Emma shifted her weight. "Did your friend reply?" John didn't stop working. "Not yet." She hesitated. "Do you think he will?" John finally turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, he will." And that was it. No doubt. No hesitation. Just certainty. Emma sighed and crossed her arms, glancing toward the road. "How long do you think we have before they come back?" John followed her gaze. "Not long." And sure enough, less than an hour later, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it, heart hammering, and checked the message. 3 words. "On my way." Emma swallowed hard. Help was coming, but would it be enough? By nightfall, the air had changed. Emma didn't know how to explain it, but she felt it. A shift, a pressure. The storm was coming. She stood at the entrance of the marina, her pulse thrumming in her ears, watching the dark road ahead. John stood beside her, arms crossed, silent. Then, headlights. 2 vehicles, a pickup truck, dark and nondescript, and a motorcycle. Emma tensed as they rolled to a stop. The truck door opened first. A man stepped out, tall, broad, his stance easy, but there was something behind his eyes, something sharp, something dangerous. The second man dismounted his motorcycle. He was leaner, but no less dangerous. His gaze swept the marina, assessing everything in a single glance. John let out a slow breath. "You got here fast." The first man smirked. "Figured you wouldn't call unless it was serious?" John nodded. "It is." The second man cracked his knuckles. "Good. We were getting bored." Emma felt a shiver roll through her. These men, they weren't just soldiers. They were something else entirely. And the reapers? They had no idea what was coming. The night air was thick with anticipation, the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of Emma's neck stand up. She stood just behind her father as he greeted the 2 men who had arrived in the truck and on the motorcycle. They weren't like the dock workers or even the bikers from last night. These men carried themselves differently, like predators. Their movements were calm, measured. Their eyes were sharp, taking in the marina, the docks, every person in the area, cataloging, calculating. Even in the dim light, Emma could see they weren't ordinary men. They were killers, but not the kind who thrived on chaos, the kind who thrived on control. The first man, the one who had driven the truck, had an air of effortless authority. He was older, maybe mid-40s, built solid like a man who had spent his life relying on his body to survive. His beard was trimmed short, peppered with grey, and the way he looked at John told Emma everything she needed to know. They had history, deep history. The second man, the one with the motorcycle, was quieter, younger. His eyes moved constantly, scanning, watching. His right hand twitched slightly, like it was used to having a weapon in it at all times. His leather jacket was plain, no gang insignias, but the way he stood, the way his muscles were coiled like a loaded spring, told her he was always ready. John crossed his arms, nodding toward the truck driver. "Didn't think you'd come personally." The older man smirked. "Didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you?" He glanced at the marina, then at Emma. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "This her?" Emma tensed slightly as his gaze settled on her. John nodded. "My daughter, Emma." The man studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod of approval. "She's got your eyes." Emma found her voice. "And you are." He grinned. "Call me Bishop." The younger man finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Gage." Emma nodded but didn't say anything. John exhaled. "Appreciate you coming." Bishop tilted his head slightly. "You don't call unless it's serious. That's enough for me." Gage's eyes flicked toward the docks. "Reapers?" John nodded. "How many?" Gage asked. "At least 10. More likely 15 by the time they come back," John replied. "Their leader, Cobra, he's the type that doesn't let things go." Bishop rubbed his jaw. "Never heard of them." "Small time. But they're growing," John said, "and they're trying to expand into this area." Bishop clicked his tongue. "That's a mistake." Emma watched the exchange with growing curiosity. These men weren't just friends of her father. They were brothers in arms. John wasn't just bringing in reinforcements, he was calling in a unit. An hour later the docks were locked down. John, Bishop and Gage had gone into full planning mode. Emma watched as they moved, setting up positions, assigning roles, reinforcing defenses. It was the most efficient thing she had ever seen. John had always been good at thinking ahead, but now, with Bishop and Gage working alongside him, it was like watching a machine in motion. Every move was calculated. Every decision had a purpose. Glenn had been tasked with keeping the dock workers in line, making sure they knew their roles, mostly to stay back, stay safe, and keep their eyes open. Emma had been given the task of watching the security cameras. Again, she wasn't thrilled about it. She wanted to do something. She wanted to fight. But when she'd protested, John had given her a look, the kind of look that said, "This isn't up for debate." So she sat inside the marina office, her fingers hovering over the radio, her eyes flicking between the screens, waiting, watching, and then a flicker, a shape moving along the road leading to the marina. Emma leaned forward, her pulse spiking. Headlights, multiple. She grabbed the radio. "They're here." Outside, John and the others were already moving. The sound of motorcycles filled the air, the deep, guttural growl of engines echoing against the quiet docks. Emma counted at least a dozen. They rolled in slow, deliberate, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Cobra was at the front. Emma could tell, even through the camera's grainy feed. He had that same cocky posture, that same air of smug confidence, like he had already won before the fight even started. But this time, things were different. This time, they weren't facing just a fisherman and a few dockhands. They were facing something else entirely. The motorcycles came to a stop. Engines cut. Silence. Then, Cobra stepped forward. Emma gritted her teeth. This man had no idea how badly he had miscalculated. John met Cobra's gaze as the man strolled onto the dock, his hands casually in his pockets. Cobra's smirk was back, like he had already forgotten how their last encounter had gone. "You've been busy," Cobra said, glancing around at the extra men. John didn't respond. Cobra chuckled. "What? No smart-ass comments this time?" Still, John said nothing. The silence stretched. Cobra's smirk twitched slightly. The bikers behind him shifted. Emma watched from the monitor, her breath caught in her throat. John wasn't just ignoring Cobra, he was waiting. And then Bishop spoke. "You boys lost?" Cobra turned his gaze toward the new arrival, sizing him up. His smirk returned. "And who the hell are you?" Bishop grinned, but it wasn't friendly. A problem. Something shifted. The tension thickened. The bikers, who had been relaxed just moments ago, stiffened. They sensed it now. They weren't in control anymore. They weren't the predators here. They were the prey. Cobra's smile faltered, just a fraction. Then he rolled his shoulders. "All right, Carter, I'm done playing games. Last chance. You give us what we want, or..." John finally spoke. "You don't want to finish that sentence." Cobra hesitated, and then suddenly Gage moved, fast, too fast for any of them to react. In a single fluid motion, he stepped forward, grabbed one of the bikers who had been shifting too close, and slammed him into the dock railing. The biker yelped, his knees buckling. The others froze. Emma sucked in a breath. Gage hadn't pulled a weapon, hadn't thrown a punch. He had just moved, and it had been enough to send a message. Cobra exhaled sharply, his expression darkening. Bishop tilted his head. Like my friend here said, "You don't want to finish that sentence." Silence. A heartbeat passed, then another. Cobra's fingers twitched at his side. Emma tensed. He was about to make a decision, a big one that would change everything, and she didn't know what it would be. The air was thick with tension. A single wrong move, one miscalculation, and everything would explode into chaos. Cobra stood at the front of his men, his fingers twitching slightly, his jaw set tight. His eyes flicked from John to Bishop, then to Gage, assessing, weighing the situation. His usual smug confidence was still there, but something else flickered beneath it now. Uncertainty. Emma could see it. So could her father, and that meant something very, very important. Cobra was hesitating, and hesitation meant weakness. John didn't move, his stance solid as ever. He didn't need to. He'd already won half the battle without throwing a single punch. But that wasn't enough, because Cobra wasn't the kind of man who backed down just because he should. He was the kind of man who fought, even when he shouldn't. Cobra let out a slow breath and forced a smirk. "You think you're real clever, don't you?" John didn't respond. Cobra scoffed. "Bringing in a couple of your old buddies to back you up, trying to scare us off?" He tilted his head. "Thing is, Carter, I don't scare easy." Bishop chuckled, low and slow. "You sure about that?" Cobra's eyes snapped to him. Bishop smiled. Not the kind of smile that was meant to be reassuring, the kind of smile that predators gave just before they sank their teeth in. Emma had never seen anyone like him before. Bishop wasn't just dangerous, he enjoyed it. Cobra shifted slightly, but before he could say another word, Gage took a step forward. The movement was so small, so controlled, but it sent a ripple through the bikers. They tensed. Even Cobra stiffened, his smirk fading just a little. "Walk away," John said, his voice calm, steady, final. "This is your last chance." Cobra exhaled sharply. Emma could see the battle playing out inside his head. He wanted to push forward, wanted to reassert control. But he wasn't stupid, not completely. He had seen what Gage had done, how fast he had moved. He had felt the presence of Bishop, standing there like a coiled snake, just waiting to strike. And he knew, if he made the wrong move here, it wouldn't just be another scuffle. It wouldn't be something they could walk away from. It would be war, a real one. And he wasn't sure he would win. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Then, finally, he let out a breath and stepped back. Emma's grip on the radio tightened. Was he really backing down, just like that? Cobra's eyes flicked to John, then to Bishop, then back to John again. "This ain't over," he said quietly. John didn't blink. "Yeah," he said, "it is." Cobra's nostrils flared, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned and motioned to his men. "Let's go." One by one, the Reapers hesitated, then followed. Some slower than others, some casting wary glances at John, some at Bishop, most at Gage, but none of them said a word. The motorcycles rumbled back to life. Cobra swung a leg over his bike, gripping the handlebars tightly. "You got lucky tonight, Carter," he called out over the noise. John shook his head. Luck had nothing to do with it. Cobra's eyes darkened, and then, finally, he pulled out. One by one, the Reapers followed. The sound of their engines faded into the distance, and then, just like that, it was over. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Glenn whistled low under his breath. Damn. John was still watching the road where the bikers had disappeared, his expression unreadable. Bishop cracked his neck. "Think he'll stay gone?" John didn't answer right away. Emma already knew what he was going to say. Number Cobra wasn't done, not by a long shot. "Tonight? Yeah," John said finally, "but it won't last." Bishop nodded. "Figured." He turned to Gage. "You get a read on them?" Gage, who had been standing so still it was almost eerie, finally spoke. "They wanted to fight," he said simply, "but they were afraid." Emma swallowed hard. Afraid. The Reapers, men who thrived on violence, men who had been so sure of their power just yesterday, had been afraid. Because of her father, because of these men. John exhaled. "They'll be back," Bishop grinned. "Good, I was getting bored anyway." John shook his head. "We don't want this turning into something bigger than it needs to be." Bishop snorted. "That ship sailed the second they put hands on your daughter." Emma tensed at the reminder. John's jaw tightened. Bishop noticed. "Don't tell me you're thinking about letting this go." John looked at him. "No." A pause. "But I don't want to start something I can't finish." Bishop smirked. "You? Not finishing something?" John didn't respond. Bishop sighed, stretching his arms. "All right, Carter, your call. But you know as well as I do, men like Cobra, they don't just walk away." John knew. They all knew, but for now at least. They had won. An hour later, the marina had mostly settled. The dock workers had gone home, the fishermen had gone back to their boats, and the tension had eased. Just a little. Emma stood on the dock, staring out at the water. The night felt different now, lighter. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest since yesterday had lifted, but only slightly. She heard footsteps behind her. John. He stopped beside her, hands in his pockets. "You all right?" She exhaled. "I think so." A beat of silence. Then, "They were afraid of you," she said quietly. John didn't say anything. "Not just you," she continued. "Bishop, Gage. The second they saw you three together, everything changed." John still didn't speak. Emma turned to look at him. "Who are they?" John was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Men I trust." That was it. That was all she got, but it was enough, for now. Emma looked back at the water. The night had ended in their favor, but it wasn't over. Not really. Cobra would come back. She knew it. John knew it. Everyone knew it. And when he did, this time he wouldn't just be looking for control. He'd be looking for revenge. The hours that followed were a strange mix of tension and calm. The immediate danger had passed. Cobra and the Reapers had left, their engines fading into the night. But nobody in the marina truly believed it was over. Not Emma, not John, not Bishop or Gage, and certainly not Cobra. Emma sat in the marina office, staring at the security monitors, replaying the night's events in her head. The way Cobra had clenched his fists before he walked away. The way his men had hesitated, their eyes flicking toward one another, uncertain for the first time. Fear had been planted, but fear didn't always lead to surrender. Sometimes it led to something worse. The door creaked open behind her. She turned to see John step inside, his face lined with exhaustion. He looked older in that moment, the weight of the past 2 days settling on his shoulders. "You should get some rest," he said. Emma scoffed. "You first." He didn't argue, didn't tell her to leave. He just sighed and sat down in the chair across from her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Emma finally broke the silence. "They're coming back." John nodded. "Yeah." Emma hesitated before asking the next question. "When?" John leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "Soon, maybe a day, maybe 2, but they won't let this go." Emma swallowed hard. She had known the answer before she asked the question, but hearing it out loud made it real. She rubbed a hand down her face. "So what's the plan?" John looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We prepare." Emma frowned. "We are prepared." "Not enough," John said. "Not yet." Emma exhaled through her nose, frustration bubbling in her chest. "How much more prepared can we get? We've got Bishop and Gage. We've got the dock workers. We've got—" "We're not thinking like them," John cut her off. His tone was calm, but there was something beneath it, something firm. "You're thinking like a defender. They're thinking like attackers. If we want to be ready, we have to think like them." Emma sat back in her chair, folding her arms. "Okay," she said. "So how do we do that?" John was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he said, "We take the fight to them." Emma's breath hitched. She wasn't expecting that, not from him. She thought he wanted to keep things contained, keep them from escalating. But maybe it was too late for that. An hour later, the War Council was gathered. John, Bishop, Gage, Emma, and Glenn, who had insisted on being involved. They sat in the back of the marina office, a map of the surrounding area spread out on the table between them. Bishop tapped a spot on the map. "This where they're holed up?" John nodded. "Old auto shop on the north side of town. Used to be abandoned, but Cobra's been using it as a clubhouse." Bishop rubbed his jaw. "Good setup. Defensible. But not impenetrable," Gage murmured, his sharp eyes scanning the map. "It's got 3 entrances, main garage bay, side door, and an emergency exit in the back." He looked at John. "How many men does he have left?" 15, John said. "Maybe a couple more, but that's the core group." "Armed?" Bishop asked. John nodded. "They had weapons last time. Knives, chains, probably a few guns." Emma felt her stomach twist. Guns. This wasn't just about fists and intimidation anymore. This was real. "All right," Bishop said, exhaling. "We've got options. We could hit them hard. Take the fight to them before they get the chance to regroup." Gage was already shaking his head. "Too risky. We don't know their numbers for sure. If we walk in blind, we could get boxed in." "So we don't walk in blind," John said. "We watch them first. Get eyes on the place. See how many men come and go. Learn their movements." Bishop smirked. "Surveillance, huh? Just like the old days?" John's expression didn't change. "Exactly like the old days." Emma looked between them. Her father had a past she had only heard pieces of. But now, sitting at this table, hearing the way they talked, the way they planned, she was beginning to see it. This wasn't just about defending the marina anymore. This was tactical, calculated, a mission. And her father, he was leading it. By sundown, they had a plan. John, Bishop, and Gage would do recon on the auto shop, tracking the Reaper's movements, seeing how many men were inside at any given time. Emma would stay at the marina, monitoring communications, keeping an eye on the security feeds in case Cobra decided to send scouts back. Glenn would act as a messenger between the 2 locations, relaying information when necessary. It was a solid plan, but solid didn't mean safe. As John strapped a knife to his belt, Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. John looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Emma exhaled slowly, nodding. She trusted him. She had to. As Bishop and Gage finished their preparations, John stepped closer to Emma. His voice was quieter now, just for her. "I need you to stay sharp," he said. "If anything happens while we're gone, you call." Emma nodded. "I will." John hesitated for a brief second. Then, to her surprise, he reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "You did good," he said. Emma blinked. She hadn't expected that. Before she could respond, John turned and walked out. Bishop and Gage followed. Then they were gone. Hours passed. Emma sat in the office, staring at the radio, waiting. Nothing yet. The security feeds showed no movement outside the marina. Glenn had checked in once, said everything was quiet. Too quiet. Then the radio crackled. Emma jumped, grabbing it. "Dad?" Static. Then John's voice, low and controlled. "We got eyes on the place?" Emma let out a breath. "What's it look like?" A pause. Then, "Busy," John said. "More men than we thought. They're gearing up." Emma's stomach tightened. Gearing up for what? "They're planning something," John continued. "We need to move now." Bishop's voice came through next, lower, edged with something dark. "They're not just waiting, Carter." A pause. "They're preparing for war." Emma swallowed hard. Then, John's voice again. "Get ready." And then the radio cut to static. The night stretched out, heavy and thick, wrapping around Eagles Point Marina like a noose, tightening inch by inch. Emma sat in the office, her fingers clenched around the radio, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. Her father's last words echoed in her mind. Get ready. She didn't know exactly what that meant, but she knew enough. It was about to happen. The waiting was over. A storm was coming. She looked at the monitors, scanning the security cameras. The marina was quiet, too quiet. The docks, the boats, even the damn seagulls. Everything was still. That kind of stillness never meant peace. It meant something was lurking. It meant danger. The radio crackled again. This time, it was Bishop. "We're moving in," he said. His voice was calm, steady, but there was an edge to it. Emma tightened her grip on the radio. "What do you mean, moving in? I thought you were just doing recon." "Plans changed," Bishop replied. "Your old man made the call. We don't have time to wait." Emma's heart pounded. She knew it. She had felt it. Cobra wasn't sitting back, licking his wounds. He wasn't giving up. He was planning his own attack. And John had decided to hit first. Emma clenched her jaw. "What's the play?" "Minimal noise, quick, precise, in and out before they know what hit 'em," Bishop said. "But if this goes loud, you'll know." Emma swallowed. "How will I know?" Bishop let out a short chuckle. "Trust me, you'll know." Then silence. The radio cut out. Emma stood, pacing, trying to keep herself from going crazy. She hated this part, the waiting, the unknown. She wanted to do something. She glanced at the office door. Then the security feed flickered. Emma's eyes snapped to the screen. Her stomach dropped. A line of motorcycles, no headlights, no engines roaring, just movement, coming toward the marina. They weren't waiting for John to make his move. Cobra had already sent his own team, and they were here. Now Emma grabbed the radio. "Dad, we have a problem." No response. She gritted her teeth. "Dad, do you copy? We have incoming—" Static. Then Gage's voice. "Say again." "Cobra's men," she said, her voice tight. "They're here." A pause. Then Gage spoke, his voice lower than before. "How many?" Emma counted fast, watching the grainy feed. 6, maybe more. "Armed?" "Can't tell, but I'd bet on it." Another pause. Then Gage muttered something she couldn't make out. "We're inside," he said. "We just took down 2 lookouts. Cobra's got at least 10 men in here, maybe more." Emma clenched her jaw. 10 in the auto shop, 6 coming for the marina. This wasn't just a gang flexing their muscle anymore. This was an all-out assault. And John, he was inside enemy territory. Emma forced herself to stay calm. "What do you want me to do?" Bishop came on the radio. "You armed?" Emma glanced at the desk drawer where John had made her keep a loaded pistol. "Yeah." "Good," Bishop said. "Keep it close. We'll handle things here. You handle the docks." Emma felt a pit open in her stomach. Handle the docks? She was alone, just her, and 6 armed bikers. Her grip tightened around the radio. "Copy that." Then she grabbed the pistol, and she moved. Outside, the marina was eerily silent. Emma crouched behind a crate, steadying her breathing, watching the dark shapes move through the shadows. 6 of them. Slow, methodical. They weren't just here to scare people. They were searching, for her, for anyone. She pressed herself lower, her heart hammering in her chest. She had 2 options. She could hide, or she could fight. She didn't get to choose. One of the bikers stopped just a few feet away, scanning the docks. Emma saw the glint of metal in his hand. A gun. She swallowed hard. He turned, and then she fired. The shot rang out, cutting through the stillness. The man stumbled back with a grunt, his weapon clattering to the dock. Then chaos. Shouts. Footsteps pounding against the wood. Emma ducked, moving fast, slipping between crates, trying to get to a better position. But they were hunting her now. She fired again, forcing them to take cover. She didn't know if she hit anyone, didn't care. She just needed to stay alive. A boot step behind her. She spun, swinging the pistol like a hammer. It connected. The man cursed, staggering back. She didn't give him a second chance. She kicked hard, sending him sprawling into the water. More shouts. They were closing in. She had seconds. Then, gunfire. Not hers. Theirs. She dropped behind cover as bullets splintered the dock. Her hands were shaking, but she wasn't done. She peeked out, took aim. Another shot. Another man down. But there were still too many. Then, the sound of an engine. Loud, powerful. Not a motorcycle. Something bigger. Headlights flooded the dock. A truck. Tearing down the gravel road, kicking up dust. And behind the wheel, Glenn. The bikers turned, startled. Too slow. The truck slammed into one of them, sending him flying. Emma didn't hesitate. She fired again. The last man dropped. Then silence. Heavy. Sudden. Emma gasped for air, her ears ringing, her hands shaking. Glenn jumped out of the truck, shotgun in hand. "You okay?" Emma nodded. "Yeah." Then the radio crackled. John's voice. "Emma, report." She swallowed hard. "We're clear," she said. A pause. Then, "Good." But his voice was tense. Emma felt her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" Another pause. Then Bishop's voice came through, grim. "We lost Cobra," he said. Emma's breath hitched. "What do you mean, lost him?" "Means he wasn't in the shop," Bishop muttered. "Means he's still out there." Silence. Then John spoke again. "We just turned this into a war." Emma tightened her grip on the radio. She already knew, and she wasn't afraid anymore. Because now, they weren't just defending. They were hunting. And Cobra? He was already dead.